There's a little Christian church in Humboldt, Tennessee. Anyone ever been to Humboldt, Tennessee? Probably not. Well, it's where my preaching professor grew up, and he decided to go back there. He was invited back there after 30 years. It's usually safe to go home after about 30 years, and so he went home. And he walked into the sanctuary, and he noticed the sanctuary had changed. It was filled with beautiful, beautiful stained glass windows. Absolutely stunning. But as he walked and looked at each of those windows, he noticed there at the bottom of each one of them was a name of a family. But he didn't recognize any of the names, which he thought was quite strange, that he wouldn't recognize a single name on any window. And so he asked one of the members, he says, "You must have had a lot of new folks join this church since I left 30 years ago." And the member responded, "Oh, these people, they're not members here." He says, "There was a town. The town here, you see, it's not grown since you were a little boy 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Matter of fact, the church hasn't even grown in those 40 years. We bought these windows, you see, from a company in Italy that does beautiful stained glass work. It turns out that they had made all these windows for a church in St. Louis. And when they got them done and shipped them over, they discovered they wouldn't fit. They'd gotten the wrong measurements. So they told the church not to ship them back. They'd make them ones that actually would fit their windows and just to sell them to whoever would buy these windows. So we bought the windows. We bought all the windows and put them in our church." The professor asked him, "Well, don't you want to remove those names? I mean, they don't mean anything to you, do they?" And the member responded, "Well, we thought about it. We had several committee meetings about it, of course, because that's what churches do. But we are just a little church, not many of us here, not many new people coming into town even. So we like to sit here on Sunday morning surrounded by all these saints that we'll never know." I was thinking about that church as I thought about today, as I thought about this Sunday, this All Saints Sunday. I thought about that little church, and I think they have it right. Surrounded by the names of saints they will never, ever know. That's you and me today. That's the church. It reminded me again of just how connected we all are. How connected we are, not just across regions and areas, but across time. Just like that little old church, the Christian faith is old too. It's been around a long, long time. A lot of saints. You know, and some folks in this day and age seem to find this whole idea that Christianity is old to be sort of an uncomfortable idea, an uncomfortable concept. I mean, who else but religious folks build buildings today that look like they're built in the 18th or 12th century, okay? Or we read from an old book with old words that we have to get up here and explain or spend hours in a Bible study explaining just the words. Or then there's the outfits that clergy wear, this strange thing we wear around our neck. This strange thing. This is a strange piece of material, isn't it? Then you know the clergy stole is actually the old Roman necktie. But Western civilization gave these up in the 5th century, okay? But the church didn't give them up. And then there's any wonder that some folks say the church really has to speak to modern people. It has to get its act together. It has to modernize. But that's been going on for years. I was Studying church history. Yeah, the necktie thing got to her. But anyway, as a student of church history, one of the things I discovered is the story about the organ. You know why they put the organ in the church? Why do we have organs in the church? Well, this is why. To entice the pagans. That's right. The organ was introduced to the church because the windows were open, the doors were open, and the organ was played so loudly that every neighbor in the neighborhood would hear, in the village, would hear the music of the organ, and it would draw them into the church. Is that what we use the organ for today? I don't think so. We're sealed in here pretty tight, aren't we, this morning? Many say the old church had better get with it. But tradition, there's something to be said for it. There's something to be said for not getting with it because there is relevance sometimes in our irrelevance of our heritage. Tradition, the past, not only gives the church roots, it gives it stability, it gives it order, it gives it wisdom, it gives it conservation, but it also gives it options. Tradition does not limit our focus to the rear view mirror. No, that's not what tradition does. Tradition enriches the spectrum of vision, the possibilities. And we crave options. Christian people are those who do what's right. They have a certainty of belief, a firm commitment, a connection, a correct action. And when we mainly listen to the voice of our conscience, when we only listen to the voice of our very limited and narrow experience, then right belief or correct action gets simplified. Those right beliefs and correct actions become way oversimplified, and the simplification runs the risk of making us slaves to the option of just a popular few who walk about. The option, the opinions, that is, that make us slaves to the opinions of just a popular few who walk about. Now, some of us have been liberated from the past. We've liberated ourselves from the past completely, but in doing that, oftentimes we make ourselves slaves of the present. And when we become slaves of the present, let me tell you, the present is one cruel master, a demanding master. But the past experience of the church open our eyes to options. He was born into the right family, the right kind of family, you know. He was born on the right side of the tracks. His father was a successful merchant. He had a good education. He had good looks. He had good friends. He liked good times. He liked good wine. And he liked a good fight. Francis Bernardone grew more serious, though, as he grew older. He became so concerned, he became concerned with the plight of the poor. He became concerned with the plight of the poor, but he wasn't overly concerned. Then one day he met a leper as he was riding his horse. And as he saw that leopard, he was moved, and so he threw him a gold coin as he rode swiftly past him. But suddenly, he was convicted. Pity swept over this young man, and he turned back. He turned back and he dismounted the horse and he took all the money he had, which was a lot, and just gave it to the leper. And then he did the most unusual thing of all. He threw his arms around him. He hugged him, even though the man was covered with sores. He hugged him with all his heart and might. And who is this man? St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis of Assisi, a young man who walked out of a good position, walked out of a life that had been set up for him by his father in order to walk with God. A saint, St. Francis. You live in an historic time. In your lifetime, the United States will probably have its first Catholic saint. And he comes from right up the road here in Okarche, Oklahoma, named Stanley Rother. Stanley Rother was born into a family. They own an equipment company and farming and ranching and all sorts of things in Okarche, Oklahoma. I mean, if you go into Okarche, you see their stuff's all there. Stanley Rother had everything set before him. But he had this call. A call to serve. A call to become a priest. A call to become a servant of Christ. And that calling took him to a place called Guatemala. Guatemala, when he began to serve, there was a time of struggle with guerrillas and the government, and there was fighting and war, and the people were oppressed, and he began to liberate those people. And they didn't like it. The government didn't, the guerrillas didn't. Stanley could have come home to Okarche, Oklahoma at any point. He chose to stay. And one day, two men entered the chapel, and he stood before the altar just like this and was gunned down and killed. A saint, soon to be the first Catholic saint in this country. You see, the stories of the saints create a disruptive option for us, for the young people of the church. You tell the stories of the saints are the most disruptive, unsettling, and revolutionary acts of the church. The saints were simply men and women who throughout history have said no to the options given to them by the status quo. They've said no to the easy and simple path of life, and they've said yes to who? God. God. And every time we enter the church, we are not alone. We are here among the saints. Perhaps that little church in Tennessee with the stained glass windows was way ahead of us. The saints gather here each Sunday morning. We are in debt to whenever we gather in this place of worship, we're in debt to them. Our spiritual forebears stared down to us from on high up there every Sunday morning. The saints, the Deborahs, the Samsons, the Gideons, the Marys, they're all looking in on us. And every time we gather for worship, we enter into a divine human conversation, a conversation that began before any of us were ever born, and a conversation that will not end until all of eternity. This conversation is far more diverse and rich than any of our experiences ever have been or ever will be. There is one reason it can be comforting to come to church. It can be comforting to come to church to know that we are gathered here among the saints, but it also can be threatening to come to church. Because sometimes it's more comfortable to delude ourselves into thinking that we're the first generation. That we're the first generation to face ethical challenges. That we're the first generation to face spiritual challenges. That we're the first generation to face all that stuff. But as you walk through these doors, you smell something. No, it's not Old Spice or Axe. What could that odor be? Then you look and you see there's Wycliffe and Luther and Wesley and Mother Teresa and Assisi, Francis of Assisi. All the saints and martyrs who've gone before us. And what you smell, my friends, is the burning flesh of sacrifice and love. So when you come in these doors on Sunday morning, you be wise to loosen your tie and fasten your seatbelt in your pew. Because you're not really sure where you'll be at the end of a service. Because when you were baptized, whether as a child or a youth or an adult, when you were baptized, as we understand it, you became a saint. And in that act, you now stand with these saints as well. Today's psalm lesson seems to be an excellent way to remember and give thanks for all the saints who have shown us the way.